Have you ever been in bed at night, staring up at the ceiling, with the world weighing down on you? Bills piling up, deadlines looming, people counting on you, your head spinning, your chest constricting, your spirit agitated. You feel like you're sinking, and the harder you struggle, the deeper you go. And in that moment, your emotions scream out louder than anything else. You can't handle this. You're not enough. You're gonna fail. But what if the voice that is loudest in your life does not have to be fear? What if the pressure you are feeling right now is not the proof that God has left you, but evidence that He is standing right there with you in the fire? Because God never demanded that you should bear the demands of life with your own strength. He commanded you to trust Him in the midst of them. And today, we're not only gonna speak of feelings, we're gonna face them. We're gonna draw back the deceptions of fear, and we're gonna speak the truth of what God has uttered. Because when what you feel conflicts with what God has spoken, there is only one voice that has the last say, and it's not your fear, it's His promise. Have you ever sat back and observed your life and said, I just can't keep doing this? The pressure accumulates in layers. It's like adding one small rock to another, until one day you're beneath a mountain crushed by the weight of it all. You're juggling responsibilities, attempting to live up to people's expectations, and straining to make everyone happy, and at the end of the day, you fall over under the weight of your own fatigue. You may even find yourself whispering to yourself, I shouldn't be this weak, I should be able to do this. But what if weakness isn't weakness? What if it's a signal? What if being overwhelmed isn't evidence that you're not doing it right, but evidence that you've been attempting to bear something you were never intended to bear alone? Life has a tendency to persuade us that strong is independent. Culture cries out, do more, be more, prove yourself, don't stop, don't rest, don't say you're losing your grip. And so you add weight upon weight, your work requirements, household responsibilities, financial stress, personal demons, and somewhere in the midst of it all, you start to suffer. We live in a culture that prizes appearance. Put on a smile, post the highlight reel, tell people you're fine, and keep walking like nothing is wrong. But inside, your soul is collapsing. That's why the invitation of Jesus sounds so different, almost scandalous compared to the noise of this world. He does not say, come to me when you have your stuff together. He does not say, come to me once you've cleaned up the mess you made. He does not even say, come to me when you're strong enough to bear your weight. He says rather, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That single declaration turns everything we've been taught on its head. We believe rest is something to be earned after we get it right, but He makes rest the beginning. When you're desperate, the last thing you think you're worthy of is grace. You think you ought to atone, make it up, or demonstrate you're worthy to be received by God. But He doesn't wait for you to arrive decked in perfection. He calls you as you are in the midst of your anxiety, in the burden of your shame, in the fatigue you've attempted to cover up. That's why it's so awkward at times when you listen to His words, because we would like to say, let me get myself together first. Let me improve my attitude. Let me show I'm spiritual enough. But the reality is, the only qualification to approach Him is to be weary, to be weighed down, to acknowledge you can't manage it any longer yourself. And that's what gives His invitation such power. You're not turned away because you're broken. You're not disqualified because you're not as tough as you imagined you'd be. The very thing you're trying to cover up, your weakness, your fatigue, your inability, is the very thing that qualifies you to receive His rest. But here's the catch. When life gets too much, we don't naturally run to God. We run to something else. We hide ourselves in distraction. We scroll mindlessly. We watch shows back to back until we're numb. We give ourselves to work thinking that if we get more done, finally the pressure will subside. Or worse, we run to habits we know will destroy us, believing perhaps for an instant they will take the pain away, and for an instant perhaps they do. But when the distraction passes, the weight remains heavier than ever before. But the reality is this: when you continue to run to distractions, you're not merely adding more noise to your life, you're accentuating the load you bear. You're bandaging wounds that require surgery. You're dulling the ache rather than curing it. And sooner or later, The requirements of life won't overwhelm you. They'll shatter you. That's why his invitation is not loose. It's imperative. He says, come to me, not to your phone, not to another person to validate you, not to temporary reliefs that leave you emptier than before. Come to me. Because the rest he provides is different from escape. It's not ignorance. It's not denial. It's not assuming the responsibilities don't exist. His rest is more profound than sleep. It's peace that greets you in the tempest. It's power that supports you up when you feel as though you're buckling. It's consolation that results from nothing of assuming the issue away, but from understanding you're not bearing it in isolation. When you put your burden down at his feet, it does not mean life becomes a piece of cake. The demands are still there, but the thing is now you are yoked with him. You are moving under his power. You are going at his pace. You are shielded by his presence. And now what once crushed you no longer has the same force, because you are no longer carrying it alone. That's the choice every frazzled heart must make. Do I just keep running to the things that leave me drained, or do I run to the one who offers rest for my heart? One of the biggest causes of feeling overwhelmed is the need to live up to expectations. You own others and the ones you believe God has set upon you. You wake up in the morning already behind, already feeling like a failure before the day begins. The burden is not only in the tasks you are expected to get done, but in the scoreboard that you carry around in your mind. Am I doing enough? Am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? And if I'm honest, the answer always sounds like no. Whatever you do, whatever boxes you tick, you always feel like you're coming short. That's the deception of performance. It never leaves you content. It never lets you rest. It always says, do more, work harder, be better. But the gospel overthrows that voice. It reminds you that your value wasn't ever determined by how you performed to start with. God's acceptance of you wasn't balanced on the scale of your accomplishments, your disciplines, or your perfect living of life. His acceptance was decided at the cross. And when you lose sight of that, you're a slave to the validation of others. You begin to live based on comparison. You compare your life to others' highlight reels. And you always fall behind because you're measuring your behind the scenes with someone else's finished product. That's why you feel drained, not just physically, but even spiritually, because you're carrying an identity that you weren't meant to carry, one that tells you that your worth is linked to your achievement. But God doesn't measure your value by how much you can bear. He measures it by whom you belong to. And belonging to him means your identity isn't fragile, isn't conditional, isn't based on the flimsy sands of how well you performed this week, or how miserably you failed yesterday. It's secure, it's unshakable. The reason you are able to breathe even under the crushing weight of the demands of life is that you no longer need to prove yourself. You are loved for who you are, not for who you believe you need to be. You are elected, not because you were worthy enough to gain his love, but because he placed his love on you prior to when you ever so much as moved a finger to earn it. The issue is, most of us don't live out of that truth, we live against it. We work ourselves into exhaustion in an attempt to validate our own existence. We agree to do everything because we don't want to disappoint others. We overcommit, not because God requested it, but because we don't want to be perceived as lazy, useless, or weak. And so the outcome is that we're living out of a false identity, one that was constructed on the shaky ground of people-pleasing. And that's the reason why, however much you do, it's never enough. Because it was never intended to be enough. And that's where surrender comes in. Not surrender as in yielding to quitting, but surrender as in laying down the stifling burden that you must do it all by yourself. Surrender is not passivity, it's faith. It's saying, God, I don't need to live up to everyone else's standards, I just need to be faithful to what you've called me to do. That's where freedom starts, when you let go of the tyranny of having to please everybody, and you ground yourself in pleasing the one whose opinion is the only one that truly counts. The second thing that keeps us paralyzed is when we get surrender and defeat confused. We believe putting it down is giving up, but the reality is, surrender is not weakness. It's wisdom. When life's got more than you can handle, surrender doesn't equate to quitting. It equates to transferring the burden from your shoulders to His. It means you've embraced the reality that you were never made to bear the complete burden of life yourself. You weren't created for it. That's why you feel overwhelmed beneath it, because you were always destined to bear it with Him, not alone. Consider the contrast between a little one attempting to bear something much too heavy and a father stepping in alongside to bear it with them. From the outside, it appears the little one is bearing it, but in truth, it's the power of the Father which enables it. That's the image of surrender. It's not you falling into defeat. It's you entering collaboration. It's you letting the one who is so much stronger take the heavier burden and you walking in tandem with Him. Surrender is also a humble action. It challenges the pride within us that wishes to be independent, that wishes to show I can do it. Because if you're being real with yourself, most of your fatigue is not derived from the demands themselves, but from your inability to own you need assistance. You're constantly going around saying, I got it, when in your mind you're suffocating. Surrender states, I don't got it, and that's okay, because He does. That's a bitter admission for those who've established their lives on independence and strength, but it's the only admission that brings freedom. The miracle of surrender is that it doesn't remove the requirements, it redefined the way you meet them. You're not quitting life, you're entering into it with another kind of strength. You're not anymore struggling to be proven. You're living in the identity of one who is already accepted. You're not anymore burdened by the impossible standards of man. You're grounded in the unchanging approval of God. That's what enables you to breathe, even when the burden is heavy. That's what makes peace possible, even in the turmoil. And here's the paradox: the instant you give up is the instant you become stronger. Not because you acquired strength anew, but because you have placed yourself under the care of the one who never tires, never stumbles, never collapses under strength. The key to handling the overwhelm is not in accomplishing more or demonstrating more. It's in relying more. Relying on Him, knowing the burden you bear, having faith that He can do what you cannot. Having faith that letting go is not the end of the battle, but the starting point of true freedom. When everything in life is bearing down on you from all sides, the natural response is to respond out of fear. Fear convinces you that you are going to lose control, that you are going to buckle under the pressure, that in some way you won't be able to survive. Fear gives voice to all the demands of your life and makes them sound louder than they actually are. It tells you, you can't do this. You're not tough enough. You'll fail. And after that voice takes over in your head, everything feels heavier than it really does. You may have 10 things to do, but fear makes them 100. You may only have one hard choice to make, but fear turns it into infinite what-ifs that incapacitate your power of forward motion. Fear doesn't so much add pressure, it amplifies it, making an impression of weight that crushes your spirit. But the voice of God says something different. Where fear shouts, you're not enough, God whispers, my grace is sufficient for you. Where fear warns, this is going to crush you, God encourages, cast your cares on me, because I care for you. It's not the magnitude of the problem that differs, but whose voice you decide to obey. Fear will always amplify your weakness and downplay God's strength. Faith does the opposite. Faith recognizes your weakness, but amplifies God's power. Faith does not dismiss the reality of the moment. It just refuses to allow the moment to dictate the result. Faith asserts, I do not see the way, but I have the one who is the way. Faith does not let feelings dictate, but stands on the immovable promises of God. And that's where the majority of people stall. They wait until they feel brave to act in faith. They wait until they feel at peace before trusting God. But that's not faith. Faith isn't the lack of fear. Faith is choosing to trust God amidst fear. Faith isn't waiting for your feelings to catch up. It's going forward in obedience, even when your feelings are yelling the opposite. If you only believe God when you feel like it, you'll never take the step into the fullness of what He's called you to. Faith is what fills the gap between what you feel and what God has spoken. It's the determination not to let your feelings dictate your destiny. Think about how many times in the Bible God had to remind his people, do not fear. Instruction is not provided because the situation wasn't scary. It was given because fear will always be the opposite of faith. Joshua was instructed to be strong and courageous, not because he was by nature not afraid, but because fear was the first barrier he needed to overcome in order to lead. Gideon was instructed that he was a great warrior while cowering in fear, because God was not addressing his emotions, he was addressing his. David stepped onto the battlefield against Goliath, not because he didn't have fear, but because he decided to do something about what God told him rather than something about what he felt. Those stories, every single one of them, show us the same thing: the choice between being paralyzed by fear and rising above by faith is what voice you choose to hear. Fear is a loud voice, but it's not honest. It speaks the worst-case scenario as if it's already definite. It describes the future without God, where you are left behind, where everything comes crumbling down. But faith speaks otherwise. Faith reminds you that even in the valley of the shadow of death, God is present. Faith proclaims that no one, nothing can separate you from his love. No trouble, no hardship, no danger, no failure on your part. Faith clings to the truth that if God is for you, who can stand against you? When life requires more from you than you can give, fear will whisper, back up, back away, give in, go numb, flee. But faith says, stay standing, keep moving, raise your eyes above the mess, look and see that God is still on the throne. Fear will always narrow your vision. The mountain will appear larger than your God. Faith, though, broadens your eyes to look at the fact that even the mountain has to yield to his authority. Fear enlarges the storm. Faith enlarges the one who is able to calm it. The fact is, fear and faith are both energized by what you look at. If you set your eyes on the requirements of life, fear will enhance. If you set your eyes on God's promises, faith will enhance. The more you practice rehearsing worst-case scenarios, the more frozen you get. The more you practice rehearsing God's faithfulness, the more courage begins to well up within you. That's why Scripture so often encourages us to remember how God delivered before. Remember God's goodness. Remember God's promise. Because memory is the gasoline of faith, and forgetfulness is the breeding ground for fear. When you lose sight of what God has done, you become a slave to fear. But when you remember, you gain the strength to trust Him once more. And let's be honest, talking faith doesn't necessarily mean that in that moment you're not still feeling completely overwhelmed. It means you're not letting that feeling control you. It means when your heart is racing, when fear is squeezing your chest, you still say the truth of God's word over your circumstances. You still affirm that He is reliable. You still decide to take the next obedience step. That's faith in action, not the lack of struggle, but the holding on to trust in the midst of it. Something is incredibly strong about telling God's word when fear is talking to you. Fear tells you, you're not going to get there. You reply, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Fear tells you, you're going to fail. You reply, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Fear tells you, you're on your own. You reply, He will never leave me nor forsake me. When you reply based on faith, you're not rejecting reality. You're asserting a higher reality. You're putting your heart in alignment with God's truth rather than your feeling. This is the tension every Christian must live with. The struggle between what you feel and what God has declared. And the determining factor isn't your strength, but your attention. If you keep your attention on fear, you'll be defeated. If you keep your attention on faith, you'll conquer. Fear sucks the strength out of you. Faith pours it in. Fear holds you back. Faith propels you forward. Fear is based on the lie that you are alone. Faith is based on the truth that God is with you, for you, and in you. And each time you opt for faith rather than fear, you break the cycle of being driven by the necessities of life and instead enter the liberty of believing the one who keeps it all from falling apart. So when life's needs are overwhelming, remember, fear will always attempt to exaggerate the load, but faith enlarges God's power. Fear will whisper you are alone, but faith proclaims you are not alone. Fear will whisper the mountain is too large, but faith will remind you the mountain has to bow to your God. You don't need to wait until you are strong enough to stand in faith. You don't need to wait for pressure to subside before believing God's promise. Faith is not waiting for feelings to catch up. It's believing what God has already said. Not every call on your life is meant to break you. It's meant to steer you closer to Him. The storm you're in isn't evidence of His absence. It's the spot where His presence is unmistakable. And while fear saps your strength, faith replenishes it. While fear freezes, faith drives. While fear utters defeat, faith utters victory. You are not what you think. You are what God has said. And if God has said you are chosen, gifted, strengthened, and maintained, then no requirement of life can burden you beyond what His Spirit can enable you to stand. So don't let fear be the last word. Let God's promise ring above your feelings. Let His power override your weakness. Let His presence remind you, you weren't meant to do this on your own. God is with you. God is for you. And if He is with you, nothing can defeat you.